again. A new big-budget movie adaptation of The Three Musketeers will have a new leading black character in it. According to the French studio producing it, the musketeer, named Hannibal, is loosely based on a real African prince. The original story by Alexandre Dumas is set in the 17th century and doesn't include any characters of African descent. The story's reimagining comes at a time when many companies are being slammed for cynically trying to prove their woke and diversity credentials. The same kind of criticism's been levelled at the first pictures of British black actress Jodie Turner-Smith playing the historical figure Queen Anne Boleyn. The actress has been cast as the second wife of Henry VIII of England in a new TV miniseries. The creators say that it's set to challenge conventions about the doomed Queen's life, but some people have found the casting choice questionable.
So, instead of making stories drawn from the intriguing lives of black historical figures across the world, film and TV producers are just going to keep casting black actors to play white people and call it diversity in progress?
All right, discussing it with us next is political analyst Reese Everson and political blogger Brian Logan. Both, welcome back to RT. So we're in 2021. This is still a thing. Reese, I mean, diversity in theatre, reimagining it as old as theatre itself, isn't it? Why should this still be a problem, do you think?
What we're doing is we're looking through a new lens. We're realizing that historically that women of color, particularly black women and men, have been shut out of roles that were, whether they were, characterizing a person of color or not, they've been shut out of those roles by Hollywood. And so what we're doing is we're reimagining ways to open those doors and open it up to people of all colors, including black women. Why shouldn't a black woman play a queen?
Anthony, you do suspect, don't you, that if, say, this was a Mexican studio with Mexican actors, or Australian studio with Australian actors, a Norwegian studio with Scandinavian actors, nobody would be batting an eyelid right now, would they?
I mean, nobody would really care. I think at the end of the day, it just makes sense to have the actors portray people in a more realistic way. We're talking about Anne Boleyn, the Queen of England. I mean, come on, this is not a black woman. It'd be the exact same thing if you had Chris Pratt, the guy who plays Captain America, portraying Shaka Zulu. It wouldn't make any sense at all. I would be like, okay, come on. Let's get a more realistic representation of that particular person. They're a real person in history. Let's make it a little bit more accurate, shall we?
Reese, wouldn't it be better for studios to be mining what must be a rich seam of untold, genuine stories from black history?
That sounds good in a vacuum. However, if we look at this from a historical lens, we'll remember things like movies like Cleopatra and how they were told with Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra, who was very much a person of African descent, and stories like Jesus, who was played by Mel Gibson, also a person of African descent. And so what we find is that historically, everyone's been okay with, or the tower of white supremacy has been okay with these stories being told by white characters. However, it seems like there's some fragility issues happening when we attempt to tell the stories with actors based on their qualifications and their ability and their skill set versus just looking at the color of their skin. And after all, isn't this what we all asked for when we said Dr. Martin Luther King was celebrated for wanting to celebrate people based or judge people based on the content of their character? That's exactly what we're doing. And now Hollywood has issues.
Anthony, you disagree?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you're talking about Cleopatra. I mean, I'm not necessarily the smartest guy in the world, but Cleopatra was more of a Greek and North African. I mean, Africa is not just one place. You get different parts of Africa. You're talking about North Africa. People look like Gaddafi, who was alive recently. He does not look like you and me. And the Egyptians that are there today were there a very long time ago. They do not look like you and me. So Cleopatra was more accurate of the Mediterranean and all that kind of stuff at that particular time than this woman who was clearly of African descent or Caribbean descent, whatever it is, trying to portray the Queen of England. And if you had any other characters that didn't quite match their historical reference, I'm against those as well. Okay, let's put all that weird stuff in the past and go forward in the future. If you want to have more black folks on television, have a story that fits them, either an original story or an historically accurate story. I think that makes more sense.
Reese, do some of these casting choices come across as a little bit cynical to you, even just slightly?
Well, here's the thing. We know for a fact that Hollywood is much more white overall than it is black. So although there are emerging filmmakers like Tyler Perry who have created, lanes where he can tell black stories, overall, there are white filmmakers creating stories that tell oftentimes stories about white characters, especially in history. So what does that mean? That black women can only play roles of queens when it's a story about Africa or when that comes up? Well, then that's severely limiting to black actresses. And what did we say again? We said just 30 days ago for Dr. Martin Luther King Day that we want to judge people based on the content of their character. And so it's disingenuous for us to turn around less than 30 days later and say, oh, no, we can't have a black woman playing a queen of England because she wouldn't have been a queen in England because that's historically inaccurate.
And
well,
Anthony,
are we going to stand on Dr. Martin Luther King's
I don't understand the content. I don't understand the content of the character argument. I don't get that part because you're talking about historically accurate. You're talking about the Queen of England, and you got a black woman in there. It makes no sense. I would say the exact same thing. You try to put a white guy as an African king. Okay, if you got Black Panther and you got T'Challa played by, I don't know, like I said again, Chris Pratt or some other kind of white Hollywood guy, I'd be like, okay, come on, this is you're talking about a place in Africa. This is a black cartoon, a black comic book. Let's put characters in there that are more accurate. And if you want to have more black folks in Hollywood, have more original black content, not just putting a black person in a white movie with a blonde wig on. I don't understand how that makes any sense.
Anthony, why should it matter? Just thinking in terms of productions of Shakespeare, which have been reimagined with diverse casts or with either all male or all female, and nobody seems to say that that's any less of a Shakespearean production just because of the casting. It's been seen as a refreshing reimagining of that production.
I mean, Shakespeare, that's kind of like more of a fictional type of thing. But even me, I'm not a fan of the thing they got on Broadway. I'm not a fan of that whole thing they got going on. I think that's kind of the same type of thing. Rather than having an original story, rather than having new, fresh black characters, you want to rehash an old white story and then put black faces in it. I think it's kind of condescending. Create new stories, better stories with black. You even said it, Reese, talking about Tyler Perry. He has his own network, his own studio where white Hollywood comes to him and rents his space, gives him money. Okay, that's how we got to do it rather than trying to rehash old movies that had white characters and then putting black faces on it.
And doesn't it feel in any way uncomfortable, Reese, when you think that it just feels like let's take these underrepresented actors of people of color from black communities and let's just put them into these existing white stories?
Well, no, because here's the truth. For every one Tyler Perry, there are probably 1,000 other filmmakers that are white. And so what you get are stories that are told from the lens of a white male, typically, or white female. And what do? You just leave thousands of black actors out of work because there aren't any stories being told, or there aren't enough storytellers that are black. There aren't enough there's only literally one Tyler Perry in the country. And so what do you do with the other thousands
and a bunch more guys that are out there doing things? The Best Man, all these movies coming from black people that are portraying black stories. I don't see how it makes any sense to say, okay, rather than just creating our own thing and doing our own wave, you want to take those same white filmmakers and the same white movies and insert one black person in there, and then all of a sudden that's better. That's representation. It doesn't make any sense to me personally.
Do you not think that when it comes to historical representation, though, generations of moviegoers have been brought up on those films which will be regarded as classics and mustn't be interfered with in any way? And we look back at them and you see these images of ancient Rome and of ancient Greece, and they're embarrassingly white, which just isn't true either, is it? So it's about time that was redressed, isn't it, Anthony?
Oh, well, Rome and Greece, you're not talking about sub-Saharan Africa. Rome and Greece was not full of guys who look like me. That's just a fact. Now, you could say they could be more racially ambiguous, and that's fine. But, come on. If you're going to put Lupita Nyong'o and her sisters in there in Greece, that's not right. The same way it wouldn't be right if you had a bunch of blonde-haired Swedish people in there either. But that's in the past. We can look at the past and say, okay, some of the movies weren't right. That's fine. But going forward into the future, let's not just live in the past. Let's just create better movies. Let's create new stories. Let's do that rather than trying to say, oh, well, the past and some of the movies weren't totally right. This is kind of silly.
And Reese,
It's
just
not
quickly.
about living in the past. It's about correcting the wrongs of the Black people who have been systematically disenfranchised from participating in Hollywood and not allowed to be in films across the board. That's what we're attempting to correct. And so to then reimagine a world where a person who's Black can play any character, specifically a queen, and to see what that does for a young African-American girl to see a Black woman play a queen, that's what we're looking at the societal benefit.
Are there no African queens? Are there no African queens that you could play rather than a white queen?
Okay, on that note, both, I guess the audience will decide when these movies finally come out. Reese Everson, Brian Logan, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us on RT International.
Thank you.
Thank you.